Stalin knew that with so many German soldiers surrendering to the West, Russia could be in real trouble if the POWs were allowed to join with Monty against him, so Stalin urged his armies on towards Berlin with all haste, which is why for the most part the Russians had bypassed the Silo Heights on the 16th of April, bent on getting to Berlin before Monty could beat them to it and get his separate peace signed. The Americans met the Russians at Torgau on the Elbe on the 25th of April. On the river front of the desolate city of Torgau, where a bombed-out railroad bridge slumped across the Elbe, a company of Russian officers waited to convoy us to Konev. A crude bridge had been thrown across the river, and teamsters were snaking timber from the nearby forests to repair the railroad span. A crudely fashioned pile driver chugged in the middle of the stream. Except for the steam engine on that pile driver, Russian methods had not changed since the time Peter the Great of Russia had massed his armies at Torgau, almost 200 years before, to march with the Austrians against Frederick the Great. Broadly, page 536. Collins met us at Leipzig and convoyed us through the corridor to Torgau. He had made the trip himself almost a week before, and while en route to the Soviet lines, he was asked if he would object to seeing a division commander. Of course not, he answered, and the column turned off to where a Soviet division occupied a position facing us. The division commander was apologetic. "May I ask you a question?" he said. "Go ahead," Collins replied. "Are your people digging in opposite us?" "Digging in?" Collins looked startled. "Why, of course not. After all, we're allies, you know." The Red commander called for a staff officer. "Cancel that order to dig in," he said. Bradley, Ibid. Roosevelt and Stalin had a common antipathy for monarchy and its institutions. Once he told me about the following episode. When they were in Tehran sitting over dinner, Roosevelt raised his glass and proposed a toast to the President of the Soviet Union. "Mr. Kalinin," everyone drank, and after a few moments Churchill raised his glass and proposed a toast to the King of Great Britain. Roosevelt said he wouldn't drink that toast. Churchill's back went up, but Roosevelt was firm. "No," he said, "I won't drink. I cannot drink to an English king. I can never forget my father's words." Stalin explained that when Roosevelt's father left for America from England or Ireland, he said on the boat to the young Roosevelt, "The king is our enemy." Roosevelt had never forgotten his father's contempt for the King of England. Despite all the requirements of etiquette, Roosevelt didn't raise his glass. Khrushchev remembers, by Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev, New York, Little Brown and Company, 1970, page 223. After the Napoleonic Wars, the British monarch had also been called the King of Hanover in 1814, and the Kingdom of Hanover had ended in 1866 when it was annexed by Prussia, and the British King of Hanover had been forced into exile in Austria. Hanover would remain a province of Prussia until 1946. Before Napoleon had taken it away from them, England had owned the entire Hanover region, an area 150 miles in diameter that included the port of Hamburg, where the Elbe River meets the North Sea. The Mittelland Canal flowed from Antwerp to Berlin, and the halfway point was the town of Minden, with its terrible memories of the English raising the countryside to become victorious over the French on the first day of August in 1759, because the French forces had been called away to another front. The 7 Years' War had been Prussia, led by Frederick the Great, allied with Britain. And they went to war against Russia, France, Austria, Hungary, Sweden, Spain, and Saxony. But the 7 Years' War had actually begun 17 years earlier with Maria Theresa's War, where Britain had been allied with Austria rather than with Austria's enemy Prussia. Because the British had been Austria's ally since 1731, they'd been able to inspect all the Austrian troop camps and supply stations and battle plans and military and transport capabilities. And while Britain helped Maria Theresa to keep her Austrian throne at the end of the war in 1748, they took away her family's land in Silesia after her final victory, even though Silesia had been the cause of the war in the first place. The fight was also over Hanover, and when Britain switched sides to ally with Prussia against Maria Theresa for the 7 Years' War that she had started to get Silesia back, the British knew that Frederick the Great would allow Britain to keep Hanover in exchange for Silesia, and in the first few years of the 7 Years' War, Prussia had soundly defeated France. But the tide turned when France badly beat Frederick the Great and Berlin was occupied by Russians for weeks, while Germany was invaded by Austrians from the south. Frederick the Great was running low on soldiers, and the French were preparing their fleet at Brest to invade England. But the Anglo-Hanoverian army stepped in to defeat the French and occupied the town of Münster, and all of a sudden the Russian Tsarina died, and Russia pulled out of the war when Peter III replaced the Tsarina, and Peter III was a friend and a fan of the Prussian Frederick the Great. The Tsarina had been suffering dizzy spells and refusing to take the medicines they were giving her, and she had a stroke on Christmas Eve and died on Christmas Day at the age of 52. And Peter III's Russians immediately joined with the Prussians to win the war for Frederick the Great. Stalin had been doing his best to purge Russia of the English and their Anglophiles, ally or not, and he knew them well enough to hold back in 1944, before liberating Warsaw, to see how the British negotiators would make out with their secret parleys to Hitler, about which Stalin was continually briefed in depth by sympathizers such as Kim Philby. Austria had been beaten at the Battle of Burkersdorf, 17 miles away from Dresden, after the Russians switched sides when the Tsarina died, and then Russia had graciously pulled out of Poland and given it to the victorious Prussians, and then returned home to Russia to finalize peace talks for the end of the 7 Years' War, and that had left Britain the ruler of the seas and the foremost colonial power on planet Earth. Frederick II the Great had captured Dresden, while the Russians had been unable to take Prussia's capital of Königsberg, and as the result of the 7 Years' War, France was forced to recognize the legitimacy of the House of Hanover, and to the British, control of Hanover meant they could keep Russia out of the North Sea by blockading the Danish Straits. Instead of trying to beat the Americans during the 7 Years' War, Britain had concentrated on defending their sugar plantations in the West Indies in the Caribbean Sea, so they could keep making rum. And the American Indians would be severely punished by the British for their double-dealing complicity with the French during the 7 Years' War. Königsberg, in Prussian, meant the King's Mountain, and the last major battle of the 7 Years' War had been fought at Torgau on the Elbe River in November of 1760, where 20,000 Austrians had been killed by Britain's ally Prussia. Torgau was 50 miles downstream on the Elbe River from Dresden, and Magdeburg was 80 miles downstream on the Elbe from Torgau, and another 150 miles downstream on the Elbe from Magdeburg was Hamburg, and the RAF bombed Magdeburg on the 16th of January in 1945, killing several thousand people, and Magdeburg was halfway between Hanover and Berlin by land. The darkest day in the history of warfare had been when all the villagers in Magdeburg had been massacred by the Catholics and their imperialist allies on the 20th of May in 1631, leaving only 500 people alive out of the 25,000 who had lived there, and Magdeburg's cathedral was where the first German Holy Roman Emperor Otto I was buried. After Napoleon's victory at Tilsit in 1807, Napoleon had met with the Russian Emperor on a raft in the middle of the Neman River to make a deal. And the result of that meeting was that Napoleon was free to fight the British in the Peninsular War, where Wellington would pay the enemy in gold to allow him to escape unharmed. And in February of 1945, a plane took off from Germany with 2 billion illegally printed French francs on board, but it exploded and saved the French economy.